The moment Jake's fingers wrapped around the crystal, his entire world exploded into fragments of light and color that had no names in any human language. He felt his consciousness being pulled apart and examined by something ancient that searched through every memory and emotion he had ever experienced. Luna watched with her violet eyes wide as silver markings began appearing on Jake's skin, spreading from where he held the crystal up his arm like living tattoos. The dragons began singing in harmony, their voices creating a shield around Jake that helped contain the raw energy pouring out of the crystal. Behind a pillar, the Elf King stepped forward slightly, his hand moving to the weapon at his side in case the human failed and needed to be stopped. But Jake held on even as the pain threatened to tear him apart, because he remembered his sister dying from the plague and how he had promised to do anything to prevent others from suffering. The crystal seemed to sense his determination, and the pain shifted, becoming something else entirely, as knowledge began flooding into his mind. He saw the history of the universe itself, how life had spread from a single point across countless galaxies, each species adding their own thread to the tapestry. The elves had been among the first to achieve spaceflight using magic and technology as one, rather than seeing them as separate forces. They had met other species and learned from them, growing in wisdom, but also becoming cautious after seeing so many civilizations destroy themselves. Humans were different because they had survived their violent nature without losing their spark of curiosity and willingness to take impossible risks. The crystal showed Jake how the void storms were not natural phenomena but weapons created by a species that had chosen extinction rather than surrender. These storms were programmed to consume all life because their creators believed that existence itself was suffering that needed to be ended. But the programming had a flaw that required both elf precision and human chaos working together to exploit and finally stop the storms. Jake gasped as the visions ended and found himself on his knees with Luna supporting him while her dragons flew, protective circles around them both. The crystal had fused with his hand, becoming part of him, and he could feel its power humming through his bones like a second heartbeat. Luna helped him stand, and he noticed that her father had emerged from hiding, no longer trying to conceal his presence from the human. The Elf King was taller than Jake had expected, with eyes that held thousands of years of memory, but also something that might have been respect. He spoke in accented English, explaining that Jake had passed the first test, but now came the harder part of learning to control what he had gained. The other elves in the chamber were whispering among themselves because no one had successfully bonded with the crystal in over 500 years. Luna led Jake to quarters that had been prepared for him, though he wondered how they knew he would succeed when everyone expected him to fail. The room was larger than his entire apartment on Earth, with walls that could become transparent to show the floating city outside whenever he wanted. The dragons had decided to stay with him, which Luna said was their choice, and meant they had accepted him as part of their family unit. She stayed to help him through the first night as his body adjusted to the changes the crystal had made to his genetic structure. Jake discovered he could now see energy patterns in the air and understand the elf language without a translator, which felt like remembering something he had always known. Luna taught him meditation techniques to keep the crystal power from overwhelming his human nervous system, which was not designed for this kind of energy. She told him about her childhood growing up as royalty, but always feeling trapped by expectations and protocols that governed every aspect of her life. Her mother had died fighting the last void storm that came close to their system, and Luna had sworn to find a way to stop them permanently. The dragons curled up between them as she talked, their warm bodies pulsing with contentment as they accepted this new pack. Dynamic Jake learned their names were Spark, Ember, and Ash, though these were rough translations of sounds that human throats could not properly make. By morning, he could feel the difference in his body, like every cell had been upgraded, but was still fundamentally human. At the core, Luna took him to meet the Council of Elders who would oversee his training, though she warned him that some still opposed bringing a human into their secrets. The council chamber was a sphere floating in the center of the city where gravity could be adjusted, so everyone sat at the same level. 12 ancient elves examined Jake with eyes that glowed different colors, each one representing a different school of knowledge and power. They tested him with puzzles that required both logic and intuition, making him demonstrate that the crystal had truly bonded with him, One elder created an illusion of a void storm, and Jake instinctively knew how to counter it, combining elf technique with human improvisation. The youngest elder, who was still over 3,000 years old, declared that Jake represented hope for both species to evolve beyond their limitations, but the oldest member warned that the real void storms would not be so easily defeated, and Jake would need to master abilities no human had ever possessed. Luna volunteered to be his primary trainer, which caused murmurs among the council since she was the king daughter and had other responsibilities. Her father surprised everyone by approving this arrangement, saying that fate had already woven their paths together and fighting it would be foolish. The dragons seemed to agree, chirping happily and performing aerial dances that left trails of colored light in the air like three-dimensional paintings. Jake spent the next weeks learning to channel energy through his body without burning out his neural pathways, which was harder than it sounded. Luna was a patient teacher, but also pushed him beyond what he thought possible because she knew the void storms would not wait for him to be ready. The morning started like any other day on the mining station orbiting Saturn, except for the strange message that appeared on every screen at exactly 600 hours Earth time. Jake Martinez had been working as a maintenance engineer for 3 years, fixing broken equipment and making sure the oxygen systems kept running smoothly when the message changed everything. It was written in a language nobody recognized at first, but then the words shifted and morphed until they became readable, in whatever language each person understood best. The message said that humanity had been chosen for a test, and one volunteer was needed to travel to the elf homeworld located in a distant galaxy that humans had never even discovered yet. Most people thought it was a joke or maybe a drill from command, but then the sky outside the station windows filled with ships unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. These ships looked like they were made from liquid metal that constantly moved and shifted, while staying in perfect formation around the mining station. Jake watched from the observation deck as one ship separated from the others and moved closer until it was right outside the airlock. A figure appeared on the main screen and everyone gasped because she looked almost human except for the pointed ears and silver hair that seemed to glow with its own light. She introduced herself as Luna, daughter of the Elf King and keeper of the dragon flame, whatever that meant. But her voice carried authority that made everyone listen. Luna explained that her people had been watching humanity for centuries, waiting for them to reach a level where they could help with a problem that threatened all life in the universe. The void storms were coming, she said, and they consumed entire solar systems, leaving nothing but empty space where billions of lives once existed. Her people had the technology to stop the storms, but they needed human creativity and courage because elves had become too cautious over their long lives to take the necessary risks. She needed one human to return with her, someone brave enough to bond with an ancient crystal that would either grant incredible power or destroy the person who touched it. The room fell, silent as everyone processed this information, and Jake found himself stepping forward before his brain could stop his feet from moving. His supervisor grabbed his arm, asking if he was crazy, but Jake just shrugged, because someone had to do it, and he had no family left on Earth anyway. Luna smiled when she saw him volunteer, and the expression transformed her face from alien beauty to something warmer and more approachable. She told him to bring nothing except himself, because everything he needed would be provided on her world, including protection from the different atmosphere. Jake followed her instructions, walking through the airlock where a beam of light pulled him up into the elf ship, like those old movies about alien abductions. Inside, the ship was nothing like he expected, with walls that looked organic and alive, pulsing with soft blue light that responded to Luna's presence. She led him to a room where 3 small creatures waited, and Jake nearly jumped back when he realized they were dragons no bigger than house cats. The dragons circled around Luna, chirping and singing in harmonious tones while their scales shifted through different colors like living rainbows. Luna introduced them as her companions since childhood, explaining that dragons on her world were different from Earth myths, being intelligent creatures that bonded with elves. One dragon approached Jake, sniffing him curiously, before making a sound that Luna translated as approval, which apparently was rare for a human. The journey to the elf homeworld took only minutes through something Luna called a fold drive that bent space rather than traveling through it. Jake watched through a window as stars streaked by in impossible patterns until suddenly they stopped and he saw a planet that defied description. It had rings like Saturn, but they were made of crystallized energy that sparked and danced while two suns cast purple shadows across continents that floated above the surface. Luna explained that her people had long ago learned to harness gravity itself, allowing them to build cities that drifted through the sky like clouds. As they descended, Jake saw towers that seemed to grow from the floating land masses themselves, twisted into impossible shapes that hurt to look at directly. The landing pad where they touched down was surrounded by trees that Jake swore were watching him. With eyes hidden in their bark, Luna father waited for them, though Jake did not know this at the time, seeing only a tall figure in robes that seemed to be woven from starlight. Other elves gathered around staring at Jake with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. Since humans were still considered primitive by their standards, Luna led him past the crowd to a chamber where the crystal waited suspended in midair, spinning slowly and pulsing with power that made the air taste like electricity. She explained that the crystal was older than both their civilizations, created by beings that had transcended physical form long before elves or humans existed. It contained knowledge and power beyond imagination, but only someone with the right combination of bravery and compassion could touch it without being destroyed. Many elves had tried over the centuries, and all had failed because they thought too much about the consequences instead of acting on instinct. Luna believed humans were different, because they often acted first and thought later, which most species considered a weakness, but might be the key. Jake stared at the crystal, feeling its pull like gravity, except it was drawing something inside him rather than his physical body. The dragons landed on his shoulders, which Luna said was unprecedented, since they usually took months to accept a new person. She stepped close enough that he could smell something like cinnamon and ozone coming from her skin, and whispered the words that would change everything: "Be brave, human." She said, so I grabbed it, not knowing her father was watching from the shadows with an expression of both hope and concern. The first real test came sooner than anyone expected, when void storm scouts appeared at the edge of the solar system, sending everyone into panic mode. Jake was in the middle of training with Luna when the alarm started screaming, and the sky above the floating city turned dark purple with warning lights. The scouts were mechanical beings that served the storms, searching for life to mark for destruction, and they had somehow found the elf homeworld. Luna grabbed her weapons while her dragons immediately shifted into combat mode, their scales hardening and their eyes glowing with predatory focus. Jake felt the crystal in his hand pulse with urgency, as if it recognized the enemy and wanted to fight. But he had only been training for 3 weeks. The Elf King appeared in full battle armor that looked like it was made from compressed starlight and carried a sword that hummed with lethal energy. He looked at Jake and said that sometimes the universe does not give us time to be ready. We simply have to rise to meet the challenge. Luna led Jake to the city defense center where hundreds of elves were coordinating their response to the scout ships approaching their world. The main screen showed 12 scout vessels, each one capable of calling the main storm if they detected enough life signs to make it worthwhile. Jake watched as elf fighters launched from hidden bases, their ships looking more like living creatures than machines as they moved through space. But the scouts had shields that adapted to any weapon used against them, which was why they had been so effective at preparing worlds for consumption. Luna explained that the scouts would need to be destroyed simultaneously, or the surviving ones would transmit their location to the main storm fleet. Jake felt the crystal pulling his attention toward a specific pattern in the scout formation, and suddenly he understood what needed to be done. He told the elf commanders that the scouts were connected by quantum entanglement, and damaging one would alert all the others instantly. But if they could overload all 12 at the exact same moment, using different energy frequencies, the scouts would cancel each other out. The elves were skeptical that a human who had just arrived could understand their enemy better than warriors who had fought them for millennia. Luna Father, however, ordered them to listen, and Jake found himself coordinating an attack plan that combined elf precision with human unpredictability. Each elf ship would need to hit their target with a specific frequency at exactly the same nanosecond, which required perfect synchronization. Jake realized he could use the crystal to create a timing pulse that all the ships could follow like a conductor. Leading an orchestra, Luna stayed beside him as he reached out with his mind, touching each pilot through the crystal and showing them exactly when to fire. The dragons added their own power to his effort, their small bodies glowing as they channeled energy through their connection to Luna. When the moment came, Jake gave the signal and 12 beams of different colored energy struck the scouts at precisely the same instant. The scout ships froze for a moment, then began to shake apart as their quantum connections turned against them, creating a cascade failure. But one scout had deployed a backup probe that Jake had not detected, and it was racing toward the edge of the system to transmit their location. Luna did not hesitate, launching herself from the defense center in a personal fighter craft that looked like crystallized lightning. Jake felt panic rise as he watched her chase the probe, knowing that if it escaped, everything they had done would be meaningless through their connection. He sent her everything the crystal was showing him about the probe weak points and optimal attack vectors. She flew like nothing Jake had ever seen before, making impossible turns that should have crushed any living being from the gravitational forces. The probe was faster, but Luna knew her home system better, using gravity wells and asteroid fields to cut corners and close the distance. With seconds to spare before the probe reached transmission range, she fired a concentrated burst that turned it into expanding vapor, but the effort had damaged her fighter. And Jake watched in horror as it began breaking apart in the void of space. Without thinking, he reached out with the crystal power, creating a tunnel of energy that pulled Luna back to the city. She materialized in the defense center, gasping for breath but alive, and her dragons immediately swarmed her, checking for injuries. The Elf King placed his hand on Jake's shoulder and said that he had saved not just Luna but their entire world from discovery. The Council of Elders, who had been watching everything, declared that Jake had proven himself worthy of learning their deepest secrets. Luna looked at him with something new in her eyes as she realized he had risked everything to save her, just as she had done for their world. That night the city celebrated their victory, but Jake could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much larger. Luna found him on a balcony overlooking the floating gardens, where bioluminescent plants created patterns that shifted with the wind. She told him that no human had ever wielded the crystal power like he had, and that even most elves could not have coordinated that attack. Jake admitted that he was scared because the crystal had shown him glimpses of what was coming, and it was worse than anyone imagined. The void storms were not just random attacks, but part of a systematic plan to clear the universe of all life before something even worse arrived. Luna took his hand, the one marked by the crystal, and promised that whatever came next, they would face it together as partners. Her dragons agreed, adding their voices to the promise in a harmony that made the plants around them glow brighter. In response, the Elf King appeared and told them that the probe had transmitted something before it was destroyed. Not their location, but a general region. This meant they had perhaps a year before the main storm fleet arrived to search every system in this part of the galaxy. Jake realized that they would need to unite not just elves and humans, but every species in the region, if they hoped to survive. Luna smiled, saying that was exactly the kind of impossible thinking that made humans special, and why the crystal had chosen him. The alliance building began immediately, with Jake and Luna traveling to different worlds to convince species that had never cooperated to work together. Their first stop was the silicon-based architects, who built entire planets from raw materials and viewed organic life as inefficient and chaotic. The architects communicated through mathematical equations that made Jake head hurt, until the crystal adapted his brain to understand them. Luna translated their response, which basically amounted to asking why they should care if organic life was eliminated from the universe. Jake did something unexpected by agreeing with them that organic life was chaotic, but arguing that chaos was necessary for evolution and growth. He showed them through the crystal how the void storms would not stop with organic life, but would eventually consume all matter and energy. The lead architect considered this for 17 minutes, which Luna said was incredibly fast for a species that usually took years to make decisions. They agreed to help, but only if they could study Jake fusion with the crystal, which they considered impossible, according to their understanding of physics. Next came the aquatic deepeners, who lived in ocean worlds and had never developed space travel because they saw no need to leave their perfect environments. Luna's ship had to be modified to fill with water, so the Deepener ambassador could meet them without dying in air. The ambassador was beautiful in an alien way, with translucent skin that showed swirling patterns of light moving through her body like living art. She listened to their warning about the void storms but said her people had survived for millions of years by hiding in the deepest trenches. Jake surprised everyone, including himself, by diving into the water chamber without any breathing equipment, trusting the crystal to keep him alive. He showed the ambassador through direct mental contact how the void storms drained entire oceans, leaving nothing but empty husks of worlds. The Deepener touched his face with webbed fingers that felt like silk and sorrow as she understood that hiding would not save them this time. She agreed to contribute their biotechnology, which could adapt to any environment, and their ability to sense disturbances in space through gravitational waves. The warrior race known as the Blazers were next, and Jake was worried because they respected only strength, and humans were physically weak compared to them. Each Blazer stood 3 meters tall with 4 arms and skin that could withstand the heat of a star surface without protection. Their general laughed when Jake challenged him to single combat, saying that crushing a human would bring no honor to his clan. Jake had been training with Luna, and the crystal had enhanced his reflexes beyond normal human limitations, though he kept this hidden. The fight lasted exactly 43 seconds, with Jake using the general's own strength against him in moves that blended elf grace with human cunning. When the general found himself on the ground with Jake's foot on his chest, he laughed even louder and declared the human worthy. The Blazers would join the alliance, bringing their fleet of warships that were considered the most destructive in the known galaxy. Luna watched Jake grow more confident with each successful negotiation, though she worried about how the crystal was changing him at fundamental levels. Sometimes his eyes would glow with silver fire when he was not paying attention, and the dragons had started treating him like an elf. The synthetic intelligence known as the Network was their strangest ally, being a collective consciousness that existed in computer systems across 12 worlds. They communicated by directly interfacing with Jake through the crystal, which felt like having 1,000 voices speaking in his mind at once. The network had already detected the void storms in their long-range sensors and had been calculating the probability of survival at 0.3%. Jake showed them something they had not considered, that the chaos of organic thinking could create solutions their logic could not compute. Together they developed new strategies that combined network processing power with the unpredictability that made organic life so hard to destroy. Luna father had been coordinating the military forces while Jake and Luna built the alliance, and he was impressed by what they accomplished in 6 months. They had united 17 species that had been enemies or strangers into a fighting force with a common purpose. But time was running out as long-range sensors detected the Void Storm fleet massing at the edge of their galactic sector. Jake spent his nights studying the crystal visions, trying to understand the weakness in the storms that the original creators had left. Luna would find him passed out at his desk with the dragons curled around him protectively while data streams flowed across his closed eyelids. She had fallen in love with him, though she had not said it out loud because there might not be time for such things. Jake knew anyway, because the crystal had created a connection between them that went deeper than words, or even thoughts. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source when the youngest dragon Spark made a sound Jake had never heard before. Luna translated, saying that Spark had noticed the void storms moved in patterns that matched the migration routes of an extinct species. This species had been called the Shepherds because they had guided younger races before disappearing without explanation. Thousands of years ago, Jake realized that the void storms were not just weapons, but were following ancient programming to clear specific paths through the universe. If they could predict the paths, they could set traps and force the storms into kill zones where the combined fleet could concentrate fire. The Elf King called a war council where representatives from every allied species gathered to hear the plan Jake and Luna had developed. Some called it insane, while others said insane was exactly what they needed against an enemy that had destroyed countless civilizations. Jake stood before them all, feeling the weight of trillions of lives depending on a human who had been fixing mining equipment just months ago. The day of the battle arrived with purple lightning crackling across space as the Void Storm fleet emerged from their dimensional fold. Jake stood on the command deck of the Allied flagship, a massive vessel created by combining technology from all 17 species working together. Luna was beside him in armor that merged elfcraft with human design, while her dragons perched on specially made platforms around the bridge. The crystal in Jake's hand was pulsing so bright that he had to wear a special glove to keep from blinding everyone around him. Through the viewing screens, they could see the Void Storm fleet spreading out like a cancer across space, consuming small asteroids to fuel themselves. Each storm ship was the size of a moon, made from dark matter that twisted light around it, creating halos of dying stars. The Elf King commanded the center fleet while Jake and Luna would lead the strike team that had to get close enough to plant the virus. This virus was not electronic, but something new that combined network code with organic adaptability and elf magic into one weapon. Jake felt fear trying to overwhelm him, but Luna, hand in his, reminded him that courage was not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. The battle began with the Blazers attacking head on their ships, firing weapons that could crack planets, while the architects built barriers in space. The Deepeners had flooded space with a biological gel that slowed the storm ships while making allied vessels move faster through it. But the storms adapted quickly, consuming the gel and turning it into more fuel, while their weapons began targeting the largest ships. Jake watched 3 Blazer dreadnoughts disappear in seconds, consumed by darkness that left not even debris behind to mark their sacrifice. Through the crystal, he could feel every death like a small light going out, and he knew they were losing too many. Too fast. Luna suggested they move early before the path to the center storm ship was completely blocked by the expanding destruction field. Her father disagreed, saying it was suicide, but Jake remembered something his sister had said before she died about tomorrow. Not being guaranteed, he made the decision to launch immediately, taking a small fighter that had been modified with technology from every allied species. Luna pilot skills combined with Jake ability to see slightly into the future. Through the crystal, let them dodge weapons that should have killed them. The dragons sang, a war song that somehow strengthened their shields while also disrupting the storm ships' targeting systems. They flew through the chaos, watching allied ships sacrifice themselves to clear a path, and Jake carved every loss into his memory when they reached the center storm ship. It was larger than anything Jake had imagined, a sphere of darkness that hurt to perceive directly. Luna flew them into what looked like solid matter, but was actually a maintenance port that the crystal had revealed. In Jake's visions, inside was worse than outside, with corridors that changed shape and gravity that pulled in different directions simultaneously. The dragons flew ahead, scouting and fighting defensive systems that looked like geometric shapes made from frozen screams. Jake and Luna fought their way to the core, where the original programming was housed in a chamber of crystallized time. The Guardian was there, an echo of the species that had created the storms, and it spoke directly into their minds. It told them that existence was pain, and that they were trying to save life from the suffering of consciousness itself. Jake argued back, saying that pain was part of growth, and that without struggle, there could be no joy or meaning. The Guardian laughed, saying humans were too young to understand the weight of eternal existence and the burden of watching everything decay. Luna stepped forward and shared her memory of her mother's death, and how that pain had driven her to save others. The Guardian paused, as if considering something it had not thought about in eons, while the battle raged outside. Jake used that moment of hesitation to upload the virus through the crystal directly into the storm's core programming. The Guardian screamed as its perfect order was infected with chaos and creativity, and the impossibility of life that refused to surrender. Throughout the storm fleet, ships began to malfunction as the virus spread through their quantum connections, turning them against each other. Some exploded while others simply shut down, drifting dead in space as their dark matter cores went inert. But the Guardian had one last attack, sending a pulse that shattered the crystal in Jake's hand into 1,000 pieces. The pain was beyond description as Jake felt part of his soul being torn away with the crystal destruction. Luna caught him as he fell, and her dragons breathed their fire into him, trying to keep his life force from escaping. She kissed him, then pouring her own energy through their connection, refusing to let him die after they had come so far. The Elf King arrived with reinforcements just as the storm ship began to collapse in on itself like a dying star. He carried Jake while Luna cleared the path, and somehow, They made it back to their fighter before the implosion consumed everything. The journey back to the fleet was a blur of pain and fading consciousness as Jake Body tried to survive without the crystal. When he woke up 3 days later, he was in a medical chamber surrounded by healers from every allied species. Luna was there looking exhausted but smiling as she told him they had won, and the storms were destroyed or retreating beyond the galaxy. The crystal was gone, but it had left something, behind a permanent change to his genetics that made him something new. He was neither fully human nor elf, but something in between that could bridge both species and help them grow together. The Elf King officially adopted Jake as his son, making him a prince of the Elf Kingdom, which caused political chaos he would deal with later. Luna asked him if he regretted leaving his old life behind for this insane adventure that had nearly killed him multiple times. Jake looked at her and the dragons, who had become his family, and said he would do it all again without hesitation. They were married in a ceremony that combined human and elf traditions with representatives from every allied species. Attending Earth received the cure for the plague, along with technology that would advance human civilization by thousands of years. Jake became the first ambassador between humans and the galactic community, teaching both sides to appreciate their differences. Luna and Jake had children who were even more unique than their father, carrying the potential for a new form of life. The dragons helped raise them, teaching them to fly before they could walk and to breathe fire before they could speak. Years later, when historians asked Jake what made him grab the crystal that day, he simply said that someone had to be brave. Luna would always add that bravery was not just taking risks, but taking them for the right reasons and the right people. Together they built a future where the impossible became normal and where love could bridge any gap between species or stars.